right, if you'll go ahead and mark in your Bibles, John chapter 4. We're going to use this passage in just a few moments as we get started today. John chapter 4. Centering on the event in Jesus' life, his encounter with the woman of Samaria at the well. But as we get started this morning, I want to go back and just briefly review the first two points that we made last week regarding Jesus and discipleship. You know, I was reading through some material that I have at home, and I ran across a quote that I thought was pretty interesting. I thought you all would kind of agree with. And it was a preacher, and he said, "There's a problem in our churches when we're more concerned with who's making decisions than we are with who's making disciples." And I thought that was a pretty interesting statement. Really got me to thinking about the topic at hand and what we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. But we talked last Sunday morning, first of all, the first point about Jesus' teaching being more a lifestyle than an event. We kind of jokingly said he didn't make statements like we'll see you next Sabbath or making the discipling situation an event, but more relationally, life on life, as some like to say. And that there were these normal life opportunities that came about that afforded him time to disciple people in a very natural way. His form of evangelism, if we're talking from an evangelism standpoint, would be very natural. And keep that phrase in your mind, natural evangelism, because we're going to come back to that before we finish up our class today. But we talked about some practical ways that you could follow Jesus' example and the way you can invest in other individuals, and that would be by simply sharing with those people, those, as I referred to last week, those utterly normal parts of life. What are some of those utterly normal parts of life that you could share with somebody? A meal. What else?
Being together.
Being together. If you're going to be doing something, why not take somebody with you, right? Let's use Alan as an example over there. Alan is going to take communion to somebody, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. What could Alan do to get somebody else involved in that ministry? I know what he could do. He could get up in the pulpit and say, today at 2 o'clock, we're going to have a seminar about how to take communion to people.
Dan started that ministry. He was.
And Dan did exactly what I'm talking about. He didn't say we're at 2 p.m. today, we're going to have a meeting to teach you how to do it. He said what? Come go with me. You know, there are a few men in this room that firsthand, know what that's all about, that were, influenced by that methodology, that idea of investing time and sharing the way in a practical manner with somebody else. Do service work together, find time to be with somebody in practical ways so that affords you opportunities to teach and not just say, as this first point, clarifies that we're not in the situation we're just calling for an event, but we're calling for a lifestyle, because that's what Jesus did. The second being, Jesus didn't just provide food, he what? He fed the people, that's right. There's a big difference, again, in putting out food for anybody who thinks they need it and taking the opportunity to sit people down and actually feed them. And, we used the reference, I think, last Sunday morning about a baby, and you put a baby in a high chair. You don't just put a steak in front of them and a fork and a knife and say, go for it, feed yourself. I mean, you. By the way, I have seen recently it's become more of a modern thing to give a baby a piece of steak and they just gnaw on it. I don't know how many of you saw that, but I've seen that recently. But they didn't give them a knife and fork and expect them to be able to carve it up perfectly and all that. But the idea here is that we talked about this last Sunday morning, that I think in some cases we've turned our churches into these serve yourself, all-you-can-eat buffets. And some of you were really excited about that, and you probably went and ate a buffet after we were done with the class. I went to Jason's Deli, and I got a baked potato. Some of you may have went to Golden Corral. That's good for you. That's not what I did, though, and not what I generally do. But there's nothing wrong if you do. It's not my favorite thing. That's why people always say, preachers historically in the Church of Christ, when it came to fellowship meals, generally eat a lot. That's been the joke throughout my life that was said about preachers and fellowship meals. And then people look at me, you don't eat very much at a fellowship meal. Well, I just don't. As a kid, I always went first. I was the first. I mean, you remember kids, right? Fellowship meals, they'd always run to be the first in line. Now, looking back, I know why I did that. Because I didn't have to eat after everybody. I got my first choice of everything. And that was, I guess, subliminally what was going on there. No, I just did it because all the other kids are doing it. I'll put it on them. I'll blame it on them.
Years ago, it was take the preacher home, feed him chicken.
The old bird. That's right. Feed him the old bird.
Sanctified yard bird.
Well, as the joke says, the preacher asked the preacher asked the kid, "What are we having for lunch?" And the kid said, "Well, all I know is Mom and Dad said we were having an old bird over for dinner." So there you have it. But what we're going to focus on this morning are the final two areas of teaching that I truly believe Jesus used in such a profound manner. And I want us to really focus on these two acts this morning of Jesus. And the first one is this: Jesus didn't mass produce disciples. And that might be counter to maybe what a lot of people in the church have kind of thought about Jesus. They see the feeding of the 5,000, or they see the Sermon on the Mount, and they see these thousands of people, and they may come to the conclusion that Jesus was amassing these large numbers of disciples. But when you look really carefully at Jesus' ministry, those really weren't true disciples. They were somewhat distant followers, and it didn't take very much to offend them and cause them to go elsewhere. Just like anything in a religious way, you're going to have those who follow at a what? At a distance. And you're going to have those who are close followers of a particular movement. And it was the same with Jesus. He had his close followers, but there were these that followed at a very far distance after a while, so much that they didn't even show up anymore. The point here that I want to start out with is this, and you might write this down. I think it's impossible to really know what somebody needs and give it to them if you don't know them, or if you're in the practice of just ministering to dozens or hundreds of people at a time. Let me say that again. I think it's impossible to know what someone needs and to provide that fulfilling of that need if you don't know them, okay? Or if you're trying to perform this task to a large number of people. Why is that the case? Let me open up the floor.
Because you don't have that closeness. You don't have that one-to-one with that person. So you don't know, that person hasn't opened up to you, or you haven't opened up to that person to really find out what it is that they are looking for, what they need.
Okay, so if you don't have a close relationship or a blossoming relationship with someone, you're not going to get down into I like to say this, the crevices of people's lives. Only when you begin to get down in the crevices of people's lives are you able to find out what's really going on in their life. Why is that the case? Don't we put on fronts? Is it possible that anybody came to church this morning with a front? Yeah, I think most of us did. Those of us that have children in this room, we know what it's like. And those of you that have children have grown, you still know what it's like to drive to church and have them fighting in the back seat and all this going on. And then you open up the doors and act like it's just a beautiful day in the neighborhood, right? That's kind of a what I like to say a shallow side, but there are deeper sides to this. There are people that have some really difficult things going on in their life, and they feel like it's necessary when they come to church to kind of mask those things somewhat, because it's a vulnerability, is it not? It's a vulnerability for people to find out what's really going on in your life and to know what is your struggle at a particular point. But what we're going to see, we're about to look at John chapter 4 in just a moment, is that Jesus was willing to get in crevices of people's lives that maybe sometimes we're not as willing to do. And why is that? We like our shallow greetings. We like to be able to say, how are you doing today? And somebody say just fine. And then we feel like we've accomplished the task for the moment at hand of doing the hospitable thing, right? We don't want that person necessarily to open up and tell us what's really going on in their life, because we don't have time for all that in the foyer of the church. 5 minutes before church is going to start. I don't have time to deal with all that, right? We don't want to make time for that. And the way we have structured churches, church services, is this 1 hour event, right? I mean, that's the way it is most cases. There's not a lot of time before and not a lot of time after to really get in the crevices of people's lives. But I want us to look real quickly, John chapter 4. Let's start in verse 4. Let me have a volunteer to read John chapter 4, verse 4, 5, and 6, and then we'll stop there. Okay?
Now he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sanford. Hope I said that right.
Close enough.
Near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon.
All right. Some of your Bibles will say the 6 hour noon. That is the correct idea there. All right. So what's going on with Jesus here?
He's walking and he's tired.
Okay. That's pretty plain, pretty clear, right?
And for one thing, he's walking in an area of geography that is shunned.
Where normally Jews would not have traveled, correct? By the way, if you look at the beginning of chapter 4, what does it say that Jesus learned? Or the Pharisees learned.
He was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John.
All right, so Jesus is learning. The Pharisees know what's happening. There's two learnings going on here, right? Jesus learned that the Pharisees had learned that Jesus was doing what? Making and baptizing more disciples than John. Okay. Although as the scripture there in parentheses says what? Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples. So he leaves Judea and departs again for Galilee. And as Alan said, he had to pass through Samaria. And those of you that understand the reality of that, Samaritans and Jews, well, the Good Samaritan is another side note to that. I think we can all understand the counterculturalness to that. Verse 7. Somebody read verse 7, please.
A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink."
All right. Is there anything abnormal about this first interaction between Jesus and this woman?
Yes.
What would be abnormal about it?
They don't talk to the Samaritans. The Samaritans don't talk to the Jews.
Okay, that's one side of it. There's something. That's right.
Yeah.
A Jewish man would not have talked to even a Jewish woman as openly as this particular.
Especially that she was by herself.
Especially that she was by herself. That is very, very true. Verse 8 says what?
His disciples had gone into the town to buy food.
All right. So,
Jesus basically alone there.
yeah, Jesus is by himself. And he sees this Samaritan woman, and where does his mind go?
How he's going to teach her about him, about God, and what God expects from her.
Okay. Is he there to sell something?
Salvation.
Is salvation a product? No.
It is an end result.
It's an end result. Okay. Let's keep going. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Someone read verse 10 for us, please.
Jesus answered and said unto her, if thou knowest the gift of God, and who it is that saith thee, give me a drink, thou would ask of him that he would give you the living water.
All right, what is she thinking about here?
Physical.
Physical?
Living in the moment, immediate circumstance.
Let's talk about her situation, by the way. He's going to reveal a little bit more about her situation, is he not?
Yes.
So she has been what? According to this situation, look at verse 18. She had had how many husbands?
5.
5.
She was living with was not a husband.
So a couple things you've got to know here. First of all, a woman in that day had no power for divorcement. She couldn't write a writ of divorcement against her husband. It wasn't possible. And it's actually possible that the one that she's with now is unwilling to marry her. And so she's in a very awkward predicament in terms of just life in general, okay? So did Jesus bring this out to call her out on her situation? Why did he bring this out? What was he trying to accomplish here?
To let her know that he was more than just a casual conversation, that he knew the insight and all about it.
Okay. What else do you think? Is that it? Or is there a little bit more to it?
Know that he was who he says he was.
Okay.
Jesus.
The Messiah that they were seeking all the time.
That's right. Don't you think, though, there's a little bit more to it in the fact that he is exposing her need? What is her greatest need at this very moment? What's that?
Is it water?
Water is a physical need, but
But to have
Salvation.
salvation, to have God in her life.
how about this? How about this? How about acceptance?
Security.
Security. What's all the things that she's missing right now in her life? She's not accepted. She has no security. She's here at noon to draw water. Why? Because
Nobody accepts
She's
her.
an outcast.
she's an outcast. Okay? Now, if you're thinking about discipleship and evangelism, and you're looking at this scenario, how different is this scenario versus the common day idea of evangelism? Would we in modern day evangelism go and seek out this particular woman? No, we would find the happily married, maybe have kids, live in the certain part of the town, and that would be our approach. But Jesus, again, as we have seen so many times in Scripture, he picks the what?
The downcast.
The downcast, the downtrodden.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
All right. Early on, Jacob's well, verse 6, Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. They'd gone into town to buy food, and he said, So, are you going on the premise that he knew this woman was, well, I know.
You already answered your question.
But I mean, is this a situation where he knew this, and so he told, this is why I'm not going to go with you, because he knew this was going to happen? Or a situation that would be more appropriate for us, where he happened to be in a certain place at a certain time?
Here's the point. I think it doesn't matter, because in this case for Jesus, I think he did know. We're not going to know, but it shouldn't matter, right?
You got to recognize.
You got to recognize.
He was tired.
You've got to see the need.
He put all that aside.
That's right.
But he had to pass through Samaria.
There was,
That indication.
most of the time they would have went way around.
Yeah.
He purposely went this direction. But the key here I'm trying to get you to see together for just a moment is whether you know the need is there in the supernatural way that Jesus did, or if you discover the need through what is our normal course, which would be what, by the way?
Life.
Conversation.
General life.
And that's what this is. I think sometimes we make more of this than we ought to, in the sense of, again, this is an ordinary part of life. A woman drawing water, well, again, noon's not the ordinary time, but this was a mundane part of life for most people.
I think what Alan was kind of talking about, I guess, the way I understood it, something that I've considered myself is maybe he was allowing the opportunity to happen, because he, had he gone into town, then his focus would have been like going into the store to buy food, whereas he put himself out there to see what would happen. And I think about that in ourselves. Like sometimes we can be so closed off into our circle. So like last year I was homeschooling my kid. We moved out to part of town where we have an acre between me and our neighbor, and so there's not much opportunity for me to speak to anybody because we're getting close in, and the only people I hang out with are people from church. And so putting ourselves out there where we can have those interactions is also important.
Yeah.
Whether or not he did it on purpose or not, but I think that was also part of it. He opened himself to that possibility by staying there.
Well, actually, I never thought of that, but that is a very good point to put in. That is a good thing. You got to get off the beaten path.
Yeah, and that's the point that we're making here, is that if he had not taken the opportunity to do this, would he have ever got into the crevices of this Samaritan woman's life?
Also, we have to remember, as we said, that his followers did not mix with the Samaritan. So if they were there, that would have been the next.
It would have been. They would have. I'm being quite honest with you. They would have been more of a distraction.
Yes,
than
an encouragement.
An encouragement in this moment, because they would have been talking amongst themselves, questioning the situation, etc.
Never made it to Jesus.
What's that?
She would have never made it to Jesus in that aspect.
Exactly.
Because they would have already drawn the water.
Yep.
There's so many scenarios here, because when you look at it, what's the basics of the scenario? It's not so much that it's Samaria as much as that it's Jacob's well.
That's right.
Which was when Jacob dug that well, that was life to all those people there. He was the one who had the manpower and the authority to do it, and the followers that followed him. So that was a life.
To us, I think it's hard for us to relate to how important that particular location was.
Well, a hurricane comes and the tap gets turned on. You have to boil your water. You can make water from just about anywhere. But it's just the comparison of the water he's offering at Jacob's well, she refers to in 18 or 19 there, is that, hey, this is Jacob, this is our father's well. This is where we get life from. Without it, we die. And that's the scenario in that point where I think he sent his disciples away to town at a time when, hey, there's nobody going to be after this well in the evening day at noon. And there's just so many things that line up. But
and the good thing in Jesus' case is that he knew how all this was going to line up.
Sure.
And he knew it would be an opportunity, like you say, send his disciples away to have this moment to interact with this person in a way that would alter her perspective and her thinking and change a lot about her life.
But
I
I think
understand, I've heard this before, the reason she was there at noon was she was not allowed to go with the other people.
I don't know that it was an allowance situation, Miss
Well, she didn't
Kathy,
want to be
as
around
much
them.
as women like to talk, right, about situations of that nature and that day, and I think even today, some maybe more social media wise today, but it was an uncomfortable situation for her, I believe. Would you agree with that? Kerry, you had something else?
I was just saying, when you get down to verse 39, you start talking about the discipleship part of it. You see where it wasn't Jesus' words that convinced these people to believe in him, it was her words.
Yep.
Right.
And I think that's the part where our discipleship, like what you're talking about, when when you see other people and you talk to them, I go to church, I do this, I do that. This is the effect it has on me. When we witness in that way, just as she witnessed to those people, because I don't think she went back right straight to the Pharisees or to the leaders of the city and said, hey, because are they going to believe her?
No.
They didn't communicate. She probably went around to the other people that were her friends or families or whatever and said, hey, look what I found.
I think there's a lot of contrast here that are going on that if we really break it down, Jesus wasn't there to sell her on a product. And when she went back to town, was she selling a product?
She was
No.
giving them.
Did she say, hey, got this, this event that's going to go on? No, she said, I did what? I met a what? What did she say? Let's look at it.
Man, they told me everything I could ever did.
That's right.
Could this be the Messiah?
So instead of selling her on, sometimes we look at that living water and we think he's selling the living water, that product, but no, he's selling her on the relationship. And what you see spring out of her is that relationship, right? Come see a man who told me all I ever did. And then she puts it in a question. She doesn't say, this is the Christ. She says what? Can this or could this be the Christ? If she would have come right out and said, this is the Christ, some of the people in that city may have went, look at the source of information, right?
It's only speculation, but what do you think the apostles would have done if they'd have been there when he started talking to the woman? I don't know that they'd been exactly thrilled.
I don't know that he would have.
That's the line he sent them to.
So the whole water scenario gave him the opening.
Yeah.
And as Carrie said, knowing these disciples, as we've seen, they would have been quickly to draw him water themselves.
Yeah.
Well, it says in verse 27, they came back and they were surprised to find him talking with the woman.
Yeah.
But none of them dared ask him, like, what are you doing? Why are you talking with her?
Yeah.
And it started because he was tired.
What's that?
It started because he was tired. It's a normal part of life.
Normal, mundane part of life. Yeah.
And she was there and everything.
I don't think they realized at this time, even the disciples themselves,
They were still struggling.
Because
Yeah.
did he really need them to protect him?
Right.
But Jesus
Question.
told her who he was.
What's that?
Jesus told her who he was.
Yeah, but Bobby, even the disciples, they were told many times, and yet
They had problems.
they had problems. So I don't imagine this one would have fully digested it all perfectly, even, too. I mean, it was a lot to swallow, you would think.
There have been a lot of previous people claiming to be.
Yes, there have been
Yeah,
previous.
that's true.
Well, for me, this story, she goes immediately and goes and tells. And I mean, that was a quick relationship that he could do that. And some of us, when we go and talk to people, it's not immediate. So sometimes we give up because it's not instant.
Well, that's because we live in a society where we're a microwave society. We want to be able to put our meal in and have it in 5 minutes, and we want positive self-gratification.
It's because I make a better impression when I'm not around. That's a fact.
See, now, if I agree with that, then there's a problem.
I'll leave the room, then you can say.
Loaded that.
Yeah, loaded that question right up for us. I really wanted you to see, though, that this morning, especially with this point, and I've got this written on the board, that when it came to Jesus and his interactions, and this is just one of many, one size did not fit all. He looked at every single situation to naturally try to find a way to connect with that particular individual in whatever their circumstance of life. And in order to do that, and this is a very short amount of time. We're not told how long they were there together, but it appears to be a fairly short amount of time. I mean, in terms of, just standing there together at the well, I'm speaking of. I don't know how long that was, but I don't think it was, several hours. But whatever amount of time it was enough for him to, because of his ability, we would struggle, right? I don't think I could meet a woman at the well and digest her life the way that he did. It'd have to come through more time and relationship.
I think in our society, if I started telling somebody I knew all the things about her, she would not want to listen. Who have you? You've been on my Facebook page.
Oh, there is actually, Kathy, this guy on YouTube that he will go into restaurants, and I don't know exactly how he does it, but he's able to find people on Facebook, and then he goes up to them and he tells them a lot about their life. Something through their phone, he's able to see who they are, and then he goes and looks on their Facebook and their social media, and he says, "Don't you have a dog named such and such?" And he starts, and these people are like, they think that he's a prophet. He's really not, but you can just see on their face, kind of that reaction that you're saying, yeah, stalker.
I think the other thing is he knew what he was offering. I think many times, at least for me, not that I don't know what I'm offering, but if I'm not spending time in the Bible and I'm not reading, and like somebody shares something with me, it's hard for me to, I guess, share if I'm not in the Bible myself. I think that's a struggle for us, is because we don't spend enough time like knowing the scriptures, then we don't really know how to talk to people about it. Where you see other denominations, whatever you want to call them, that we all are very well aware that like to knock on doors, like do ask them questions. Those people know, because that's how they're
trained.
That's how they're trained.
Yeah,
it's good practice is to invite them in and have a discussion with them.
Oh no,
I've done that a couple of times.
I just take the flyer because like I'm not getting in there with it. Like no,
I hide under the table.
No, man.
That's what I did as a kid. Anytime when I was a little kid and they'd come to the door, I'd get so scared I'd hide under the table.
But they have answers. That's the thing.
You have a Bible study, right? I mean, kids.
Well, I was 6 years old. I wasn't having a Bible study with them. All I knew was there were two guys in black suits standing in my front door, and Mom was up at my grandmother's house, and I was in the house by myself. I'm hiding under the table.
Well, that's what I do. I hide under the table.
When you're dealing with people, you're going to deal with different learning styles, different maturity levels, different strengths, different weaknesses, different backgrounds, different cultures, and be quite honest, different talents. Yes, I do believe that Jesus taught the masses, but I don't think that's where discipleship happened with Jesus. I think true discipleship with Jesus came, and again, those more personal points of life. I truly believe when I read the Gospels that what attracted people to truly follow Jesus were those moments where they could intimately see what he was all about. And I don't think it's remarkably different with us. I mean, if we've seen anything in this book over the last several weeks, we've kind of seen this repeated reminder that, sometimes we tend to sell our church. We sell our church. Come see what our church is. We've got this, we've got that. And yet, and I think there's a good debate even with what you were talking about how much we know. And I think you're right, about study. But I think one of the debates is, well, how much do you have to know in order to talk to somebody about Jesus? That's one of the debates that's going on. And Christendom today is like, if you're going to evangelize, if you're going to disciple, if you're going to begin to get into the crevices of somebody's life, do you have to have a master's degree in divinity to do that? No. Okay.
We've been talking about, I guess, a lot of ifs, like say if the disciples were there, if the Lord would have been giving water at a different time. But if we look at that and other examples, Jesus puts himself with the right people at the right time to get what things are done. I mean,
to get the right results?
To get the correct results, what he's trying to get across. There's a reason why he's doing what he's doing. We have a lot of examples of what to do, but the timing for us is what we have to learn, because timing is very impactful on how we do things.
Kevin, would it be a true statement, in your opinion, that we teach more in theory than we do in practicality when it comes to these situations?
Yeah.
I mean, we have entire classes that talk about theoretically what evangelism is, but very seldom do we truly get down to what we're trying to see today, and that is the practical, when you have an opportunity, how to take advantage of it.
Or even how to make those opportunities.
Or even how to make those opportunities. I guess what I'm leaning to, Kevin, you said this, you kind of said something along the lines of there's a purpose, right? Jesus was very purposeful. I don't see Jesus like sometimes I am. Some days I'm like a chicken with his head cut off. I'm just, run around in these different directions. I think it's much harder for God to use us when we're that way than if we're purposeful. That I could be wrong, but I feel like
Jesus did not have 5 children and a wife.
I can't use that as an excuse. He had 12. Yeah.
Going to that, I had the privilege of being raised into a household where I saw both the theological and then the servant part. My dad was very much theological. I would see him at 4 a.m. He would set his alarm so he could read the Bible for an hour before he went to work. He could tell you verses after verses after verses memorized. I remember when we were 12, we had to memorize 40 Bible verses for us to be able to go somewhere. And my mom came from a difficult upbringing, so she didn't have a lot of schooling. And she always kind of downgraded herself and said, I just, don't really know how to talk to people about God. But she is a servant through and through. And she had 4 kids and a mother-in-law and a husband. And she was always finding ways to help others. Now, if you ask me now, who brought more people to church and got baptized? My mom did. I don't think my dad brought anyone to church. But my mom brought several people just through her acts of servitude. She may not have been able to open the Bible and, talk about the genealogy of Jacob and Jesus, but with her acts, she managed to get people to church. Whereas my dad didn't.
Boy, there's a lot to that. Thank you for sharing that. And I think sometimes we we feel intimidated, and maybe your mother was this, maybe sometimes we feel intimidated when we don't have the knowledge that maybe somebody else close to us has, right? And that causes us to feel like we're not as worthy as maybe those people. There are preachers, friends of mine, that could get up in the pulpit and quote 100 verses, every Sunday by memory. I'm just not that. I don't have that talent, but I still tried to use other ways that God has given me to communicate.
I was so impressed with Brother Burton Kaufman because he could just spell off the genealogy of Jesus just like that,
And I think that's great. But I go back to the Apostle Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 13. What did he say?
He said, if you don't have love,
I can have all knowledge.
If you don't have the love with it,
So I think there has to be a connection between knowledge and need. Like having the knowledge, but also having, and I'm not saying that Burton Kaufman did, I think he did from all indications. But a lot of times it's an if or, either or scenario, and I don't think it necessarily has to be. Yeah.
I think it's a slippery slope because the Bible tells us to study to show ourselves approved. But on the other hand, if we live the fruits of the Spirit, we're able to live that example to show other people.
That's right.
And I think that's a very vital point in the way of being either a servitude or a disciple study of the Word. Because if you don't know the Word,
I think it shouldn't be an either or scenario, should it?
right? It's got to be a combination.
But I don't, again, and maybe I'm wrong with this, but I don't think you have to have a master's of divinity or be some kind of, just incredibly gifted Bible student to get to the point where you can take the two together and use them.
Luke 10:21. At that time, Jesus, full of joy through the Holy Spirit, said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this was your good pleasure.
That's right.
You think, Jonathan, we've turned evangelism into an event instead of a lifestyle?
And I think that's what this whole chapter is about. I think
nothing wrong with the events.
No.
That have it as a thrust, but that's the only time you can evangelize because we're having a door knocking event or whatever.
And this is nothing against the classes going on in the auditorium. I think the title is Why Evangelism. I think most of us know why. I think our disconnection is how. And it's got to occur naturally within our life. I'm going to share this with you because a lot of you have been asking, where are we going with this after, because we only got one more chapter, right? So a good friend of mine, Matthew Morin, wrote a book called Natural Evangelism. You may not have heard this ideology, this missional ideology very often in your life, but Matthew wrote his dissertation in college where I went to school at Heritage Christian. He wrote his dissertation on being more missional in the church. And he wrote this book called Natural Evangelism. And I've been praying about it and talking with Matthew about it. And two things. I want to share with you in 2 weeks a video that Matthew put out about natural evangelism. And I'm going to order books for us to continue on in this class and kind of take it in the direction of a very practical study of evangelism. Not this is what evangelism is. No, practically, what are some ways that we can connect? And so that's the direction that we're going to go here in 2 weeks. I need for you to help me, though, this morning before we close class. How many books would I need to order?
We have it online. That's why you had.
No, this one doesn't have online, unfortunately. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay. If I get 20 copies of the book, I think that should be plenty for this class, okay? If you want to go online and order it yourself, you can do that. You can just let me know. It's called, again, Matthew Morine, that's Morine. He's the preacher for the Castle Rock Church of Christ in Colorado. The book is called Natural Evangelism. And let me tell you real quickly, before you go, here's the reason why. A lot of us have...
I have to go to work.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I'll listen to you. Hurry up. Go ahead.
Well, the reason for this is that you've asked the question before about how do we make it? How do we do it? And that's where I want to go. How can we practically do this?
Yeah, thank you.
So, and that's the best book I know to help us to do that.
For giving us that, because I mean, it's as I always tell you, I've been wrestling with how do we go, you know. I mean, this book has opened our eyes, and now we need to do something.
Now we need to push it forward.
Like the song says, I know what I want, I just don't know how to go about it.
Right. And I think a lot of us are in that boat. So that's the direction we're going to go. Thank y'all for putting up with me. I love y'all.
Love you too, John.